On July 13th, clashes broke out between the Druze and Bedouins around Druze-majority Suwayda in southern Syria. As the situation went out of hand, Syrian troops tried to intervene. Druze leaders have long bristled at the presence of government forces in Suwayda. They have maintained their own militias while expressing fears of the new government led by Shara. The government declared a ceasefire on July 15th, and Druze leaders called on the community's armed factions to stand down. But fighting soon resumed. During the unrest, there were reports of extrajudicial killings. Videos posted on social media appeared to show Syrian government troops abusing or humiliating Druze residents. That's when Israel decided to step in. Shocking footage showed the Israel Defense Force bombing the Syrian military headquarters in Damascus. Shara stressed that the Druze were a fundamental part of the fabric of this nation and rejected any attempt for them to be dragged into the hands of what he called an external party. Syria's interim president said government forces deployed in Suwayda had succeeded in restoring stability and expelling outlawed factions, despite the Israeli interventions, which he said caused a significant complication of the situation. Shara said responsibility for security in Suwayda would now be handed to religious elders and some local factions based on national interest. He also promised that the government was keen on holding accountable those who had transgressed and abused Druze people. But there is widespread distrust among the Druze minority towards Shara's government. The interim government promised to include minorities, including the Druze, but the new 23-member government in Syria, announced in late March, has only one Druze member. President Donald Trump's administration has repeatedly warned Shara and his government against targeting minority communities, including the Druze. At the same time, Trump has shifted his position on Shara in recent months. He briefly met Shara during a visit to Riyadh in May and announced the lifting of sanctions against Syria. Will the US now put pressure on Damascus to rein in its fighters? It could also turn to partners with influence in Damascus like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. At the same time, the US will have to urge Israel to pull back on strikes on Syria. While limited action could help defend the Druze and keep threatening actors away from the Syria-Israel border, intensifying strikes on government targets in Damascus could lead to massive destabilization in a region which is already war-torn and weary. It was supposed to be Trump's big Middle East breakthrough, normalizing ties between Israel and Syria after decades of hostility. But instead, Damascus is burning. Israeli warplanes have slammed into Syria's Ministry of Defense, and more than 350 people are dead in Suwayda after sectarian clashes spiraled out of control. For months, Syria and Israel have been inching towards dialogue. Back-channel talks brokered by the UAE, nudged along by Washington, and fueled by Trump's eagerness to expand the Abraham Accords. Syria's interim president Ahmad al-Shara, who replaced Bashar al-Assad after his December 2024 downfall, signaled openness to a ceasefire framework. But normalization was always a long shot. The sticking point was the Golan Heights. Israel refused to even discuss withdrawal from the occupied territory. And then came Suwayda, a Druze-majority province already scarred by Syria's civil war. On July 13, 2025, a Druze merchant's abduction by Bedouin tribes triggered an avalanche. Druze militias fought back. Syrian government forces moved in, and soon accusations of extrajudicial killings set the province ablaze. Israel intervened militarily on the 15th of July, claiming it was protecting the Druze, an Arabic-speaking minority spread across Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and the Golan Heights.
We are also operating in Syria. We have an obligation to maintain the southwestern region of Syria as a demilitarized zone bordering Israel. We will not allow a return to a situation where a second Lebanon is being established there. And we are also obligated to protect the Druze residents. We are doing this through intense operations. I hope we will not have to operate anymore, It depends very much on what is understood and done, and also what is not done in Damascus.
But critics say Israel's strikes are less about Druze protection and more about shaping post-war Syria to its advantage. On the 16th of July, Israeli fighter jets pounded Damascus, hitting Syria's Ministry of Defense and areas near the presidential palace. The strike sent TV anchors diving under their desks as cameras rolled live. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned the painful blows have begun. In Suwayda, Israel demanded Syrian forces withdraw. Convoys of government troops pulled back, but militias remained in control. Syria's President al-Shara accused Israel of trying to fragment the country and promised protection for the Druze. Yet, some Druze leaders have rejected ceasefire deals, deepening the crisis. The US stepped in. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that specific steps had been agreed to restore calm. But the ceasefires are paper thin.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the southwest of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last couple hours.
Arab states, Turkey and even Iran have all condemned Israel's strikes. The UN Security Council is now scrambling to address what it calls a dangerous escalation. For Israel, Suwayda is a buffer zone, too close to its border to risk Islamist fighters taking hold. For Syria, it's a test of authority in a fractured country where minorities mistrust the Sunni-led administration. Analysts warn that Israel's message of protecting minorities risks inflaming sectarian divides further. Many Druze in Syria reject Israeli intervention, fearing it paints them as collaborators. And Trump's normalization dream is in jeopardy. Syria's internal chaos and Israeli airstrikes have pulled the plug on any serious dialogue. Sectarian clashes in Syria have left more than 200 people dead, sparked a war between Israel and President Ahmad al-Shara's forces, and raised fears of a breakdown in the country's fragile post-war order. Syria is deeply divided as it tries to emerge from decades of dictatorship and nearly 14 years of civil war. But why is it burning all over again? How did it start? Clashes began on July 13th between factions from the Druze religious minority and Bedouin tribes who are Sunni Muslims. The two sides have a long-standing feud in Suwayda. Clashes have on several occasions broken out between forces loyal to the government and Druze fighters since the fall of President Bashar al-Assad. But this time around, the fighting threatened to escalate into a larger conflict. Syrian government forces sent reinforcements to the region, saying they want to re-establish security. But according to witnesses, government forces and allied groups, including Bedouins, took control of several villages near Suwayda that were previously run by Druze fighters. Then on July 15th, following contacts between Damascus authorities and stakeholders from Suwayda, the Syrian Defense Ministry announced a ceasefire after government forces had entered the city. The Druze religious sect is a minority group. More than half of the roughly 1 million Druze worldwide live in Syria, largely in the southern Suwayda province. The transitional government has promised to include minorities, including the Druze, but the new 23-member government in Syria, announced in late March, only has one Druze member. Under the Assad family's tight rule, religious freedom was guaranteed. But under Shara, the Druze have been divided over how to deal with their issues. A key sticking point is disarmament of Druze militia and integration. Shara has said that the right of ethnic and religious minorities will be protected, but there have been several rounds of sectarian killings since Assad's fall. The Israeli army launched airstrikes on the Syrian Defense Ministry and near the presidential palace in capital Damascus. Israeli Defense Minister Katz said the IDF will continue operating with force in Suwayda to destroy the forces that attacked the Druze until their withdrawal is complete. The Gulf Cooperation Council called it a flagrant violation of Syria's sovereignty, a breach of international laws and norms, and a serious threat to regional security and stability.
אחיי אזרחי ישראל הדרוזים, המצב בסווידה, המצב בדרום מערב סוריה, הוא חמור מאוד. צה"ל פועל, חיל האוויר פועל, כוחות אחרים פועלים. אנחנו פועלים כדי להציל את אחינו הדרוזים וכדי לחסל את כנופיות המשטר. ועכשיו יש לי בקשה אחת מכם. אתם אזרחי ישראל, אל תעברו את הגבול. אתם מסכנים את חייכם, אתם יכולים להירצח, אתם יכולים להיחטף, ואתם פוגעים במאמצים של צה"ל. ולכן אני מבקש מכם, חזרו לבתיכם, תנו לצה"ל לפעול.
In a direct message to the Druze community of Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged restraint and warned against crossing into Syrian territory. Nearly 130,000 Israeli Druze live in Carmel and Galilee in Israel's north. Druze men over the age of 18 have been conscripted in the Israeli military since 1957. The Israeli government has also unilaterally declared a demilitarization zone in Syria, something that the Shara government has rejected. Since the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024, Israel has both seized more territory in Syria and repeatedly launched strikes in the country. The attacks have continued despite Israel's closest ally, the United States, pushing for the country to normalize relations with the new regime in Syria.
We're going to be working on that issue as we speak. I just got off the phone with the relevant parties. We're very concerned about it. And hopefully we'll have some updates later today for you. But we're very concerned about it. We want it to stop.
In May, US President Donald Trump held a meeting with Shara in Riyadh. It was the first high-level US-Syria meeting in decades. He announced the lifting of US sanctions against Syria just before the meeting.